episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very much appreciated. Had a lovely email from Georgie at Heartcut. They seem to be quite happy with the review, which is really nice. So don't forget that obviously Gauntlets will be having a whisky tasting evening with Heartcut in October. So still tickets available from, I think. So if you fancy tasting any of the ones that were in the show last week, maybe some, or I don't know exactly what's going to be going on there, but it'll be a good night, as they always are. So there's still tickets available for that. Anyway, on to this week's episode of the show. As you know, I get samples from time to time, and they sit around and they wait for their moment in the spotlight, and sometimes that moment never arrives because for one reason or another, maybe I don't get enough samples of one particular style or distillery or something like that together at the same time to do it. So every now and again I like to do a bit of a sort of a roundup episode. It's these are samples that have come to me over a relatively shortish period of time, I think, and they're mostly newish bottlings or still readily available. And there's a different variety, as you can see, quite a broad selection. It's always good fun to do that, well, for me anyway. And like I said, it kind of gets rid of a load of samples that otherwise would have just sat around forever and a day. So not really a great deal to say about the individual distilleries, because I'm pretty certain I've featured all of them in episodes at one point or other in the decades I've been doing this for, or decade I should say I've been doing it for. Anyway, so I'm just going to rattle through the lineup. Right, okay, so bottling number one is from the Shed Distillery in Ireland. This is the Drumshanbo Galanta triple distilled single malt. This was the 2022 release, so although this particular release might not be available in retailers, I'm pretty certain that they will have bottled more during the subsequent years. So always been a big fan of the Shed Distillery. Love their pot still. Their pot still is quite intriguing because it's malted barley and unmalted wheat. Which gives it a completely different flavour profile to say something like Redbreast or Green Spot or something like that. And I've always been a really big fan of what the Shed Distillery have been up to, so looking forward to tasting that. Bottling number two is a relatively new distillery. You may well remember I did an episode of the show on them. This is Holyrood in Edinburgh. This is their relatively new release. Certainly it was released earlier this year, called Pitch, bottled at 49.4%. By the way, sorry, I forgot to mention that the ABV of the Drumshanbo is 46%. Anyway, so Pitch is basically, as you know, Holyrood are experimenting with different yeasts and casks and all that kind of geeky stuff, which is absolutely wonderful, which is why I really love what they're doing. So this is made from two malts, 84% Scottish pot still malt and 16% brown malt, which tends to be used in the brewing industry. Then they use three types of yeast. It's 70% Pinnacle MG Plus, which is then pitched with 15% Toro Nero and 15% Pepe Nero yeast. Now, the term, as far as I'm aware, to pitch basically just means adding yeast to the wort to start the fermentation process. So aptly named release, I suppose, but when they say it was pitched with these two other yeasts, I'm assuming they just mean the yeasts were mixed together, because obviously it's to start the fermentation. So they might have been added at separate stages. I certainly remember when I was at Brooklady and was sort of working with the fermentation and filling up the wash back. I remember being told that they introduced the yeast in two stages. So they would start off with a relative fast-acting yeast. I can't remember what the variety was, but that would get the fermentation going pretty quickly, but it wouldn't last the length of time. So at a certain point in time they would add the second yeast, which was kind of built for power, not speed, if you see what I mean. So I don't know whether they do a very similar thing at Holyrood or not. I couldn't honestly tell you. Bottling number 3 is the latest bottling from Lindores Abbey in their Friar John Core, the Cask Strength Congregation, Chapter 3. Wow, that's a mouthful and a half, isn't it? So, building on the success of the first 2 releases, I mean, release number 1 was an absolute humdinger of release, and I absolutely loved it. So batch number 3 is, again, slightly different cask makeup. It is ex-Bourbon, ex-Amontillado, and ex-Pedro Ximenez. It's bottled at the, very, very user-friendly ABV of 60.2%. But is full. Anyway, yeah, so chapter 1 apparently was really intriguing. That was Bourbon, Manzanilla, STR and Sherry. Chapter 2, which I thought was the most intriguing release, was Bourbon, STR and Peated X-Rum Cask, which was really cool. Incidentally, Lindores have just released a single cask bottling of a Peated X-Rum Cask, very, very limited, UK only. I can tell you that if you're booked on the tasting, the whiskey tasting for this month, and I think all the tickets are sold, you're going to get the opportunity to try it, so that's going to be really cool. On to the next bottling is another favourite distillery of mine, Lochlea. This is their cask strength batch number 3. Again, not the too inconsiderable ABV of 59%. I think I'm going to have to go and have a lay down after this one, I think. So this is 60% Oloroso and 33% ex-Isla Bourbon cask, probably Lefroy, one imagines. I remember batch number 1 was I thought really nicely balanced. Again, sort of combination, predominantly sherry, but a bit of American oak, and had some nice balance. Number 2 was a bit of a sherry monster, I'm afraid, and it was one that I was really not that keen on. I mean, it was on the shelf because, well, you know, there are poor individuals that like sherry monsters that you have to sell the stuff to, otherwise, you know, you're losing a sale. So it was on the shelf. It wasn't one that I would go and rush out and you know, suggest. But anyway, so we're going to have a look at number 3, and hopefully number 3 will be closer in style to batch number 1 with that really nice balance. Then the final 2, a bit of peat, because I always like to finish with a bit of peat. So this is the latest bottling of Ardnamurchan's the Midge. Slightly different cask makeup to batch number, or the first batch, or last year's release. It's 75% peated malt, peated spirit, with 25% unpeated spirit. Obviously, it's aged in 50% bourbon, 48% ruby port, and 2% sherry. Now, you're probably thinking, well, you never actually reviewed the last year's release, and there's a reason I didn't. I really didn't like it that much. It wasn't that it was a bad whiskey. I mean, I could see what they were aiming for. The Midge is an irritant, it's got a bite and all that kind of stuff. And so they used really young spirit. Now, I know that Ardnamurchan has actually got away with releasing fairly young spirit for quite some time, which is quite remarkable, given that it's a relatively sort of traditional-ish sort of style of new make. But it was just that little bit too young, a little bit too spirity, a bit too fiery, and just the trouble is, just like I said I've said to numerous people about numerous distilleries, it's like when you set your bar really, really high, you really got to hit it every time. Just missing it by half a thou, and you notice it. You really do notice it. So unfortunately, batch number 1 I really wasn't a huge fan of, so I'm hoping batch number 2, or the second release of the Midge, is going to be slightly less irritant. And on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the Torabhaig Legacy Series number 4, and they've called it the Sound of Sleat. Now, it's not the sound of the sound of sleet on the distillery roof. It's actually, as far as I'm aware, the sound is an inlet. It's probably called the Sound of Sleat, I imagine, but anyway. It's a bottle of 46%. It's 5 and 6 year old spirit, peated to 70 to 78 parts per million, aged 20% virgin American oak and 80% refill ex-bourbon, bottled at 46%. Now, I have been informed that this is now going to be the standard core release. Now, obviously, this is the release number 4 that they've done. And one thing you just don't think about with new distilleries is that obviously when the distillery is being planned, the master distiller has basically sort of got in his head how he wants the spirit to turn out, and so therefore knows how, knows the fermentation time, cut points, all that kind of stuff. But of course, obviously, until you actually physically do it, you can't really be 100% sure that the spirit is going to turn out how you documented it on paper, and obviously there tends to be a little bit of tweaking going on, and this is exactly what happened at Torabhaig. They obviously mapped out how they wanted the spirit to be, but of course obviously along, as they went along, they were tweaking bits here and there just to sort of like perfect it. And of course obviously you've got all these casks now of spirit that, although probably only marginally was different, and certainly, I mean, I've tasted all 4 of the releases now, and with the exception of the 3rd batch, the Ardnamurchan, which was sherry mature. I had an element of sherry in there. I don't recall there being a sort of a huge difference, so the difference is relatively minor. But anyway, batch number 4, which we're at now, or bottling number 4, is now the spirit. This is where they decided, yep, got it all right, sorted. So this is the style of Torabhaig which will carry on forever and a day, hopefully. So kind of looking forward to finishing on that one. So anyway, I think I've done enough waffling, so let's start off with a little bit of Irish then. Okay, so kicking off with the Galanta triple distilled single malt. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that is a lovely nose. That is beautiful. It is just everything I love in a whiskey. It's exuberant, it's fruity, it's aromatic, it's Viognier-esque, it's peach, it's apricot, it's pineapple, pear. Oh, it is a wonderful fruit monster. But there is a citric note coming through there. There's some minerality. There's some barley. There's some sweet barley. A little bit of creamy oak. So it's not a one-dimensional whiskey by any shot. It has some lovely complexity. The balance of the spirit and the oak is absolutely spot on. This is the sort of whiskey that I absolutely love. I shall pass on. Right, kicks off with a little bit more barley, a bit more that straw-like barley. The estuary fruit moves in on the mid-palate. So again, apricot, pineapple, apple, pear. Lovely spiciness. Oak comes in on the sort of like, the latter part of the mid-palate into the finish. A little bit of spice, or quite a bit of spice in actual fact. Vanilla. It's got a nice grippy, slightly toasty finish. Lovely finish, it has to be said. Lovely, progression all round. Absolutely lovely whiskey. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? And the but is the elephant in the room, because the elephant has got a big but. It's 102 quid. Why? Why is this retailing for 102 quid when their pot still is 58 quid? I don't get it. I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me. Why is this so much more expensive? Understand it's triple distilled. Yeah, okay, so that's a bit more, electricity, a bit more sort of, gas or whatever. Don't get it. Really don't get it. Beautiful whiskey, lovely whiskey, silly price. So let's move on to the Holyrood Pitch. So let's see what the nose gives us. I don't know if I mentioned it, but after all the talking about the sort of different malts and the different yeasts and what have you, it's 100% Oloroso matured. So let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Okay, so it's got some sherry character, obviously. I'd have been amazed if it didn't have. But I'm getting the barley, I'm getting dried citrus, biscuits, oxidised fruit, a little bit of a grassy note coming through. bold but balanced, quite botanical now. I mean, there's really that herbal character is really kind of coming through, and it's obviously, I'm guessing, probably coming from the Pepe Nero and the Toro Nero yeasts, I'm guessing. I mean, I don't exactly know them particularly well, never had them for dinner. Yeah, a little bit of chocolate as well. I mean, that's a lovely nose. I mean, it's really quite complex, and like I said, it could have been completely and utterly blasted by the sherry, but obviously, even though Holyrood is playing with all these different types of yeast, and I think it's basically they are almost doing what sort of West Midlands Distillery are doing, is creating a new make that's tailored to a specific cask type. It's not, and this is the wonderful thing about a lot of the modern distilleries and the smaller distilleries who can do that. It's not a case of, right, we're just making our new make in the style we want to make it, and then we'll just shove it into casks and see what happens. So, you know, people are thinking about, you know, do we need a sort of a traditional style of new make to sort of work with this? Do we need, you know, for the different cask types? And that's just blowing me away. I mean, it really is. But anyway, kind of coming back to this, so it tends to have, I mean, I think sort of from tasting the other bottlings of Holyrood, it's kind of in the middle. It's not quite traditional lowland, it's not sort of modern lowland, it's sort of a hybrid of the two. And it's certainly got a lovely fruitiness, but it's not overtly fruity, it's not estery, it's not slightly confected. It's just got some nice apricot-y kind of lowlandy character. It's got a bit of biscuitiness, and like I said, it's got that herbal note probably coming from the yeast, and it's got some herbal notes probably coming from the sherry as well, along with the dried fruit. It's just a really nicely balanced nose. Let's see what that's like. Quite fresh to start off with, then moving into some honey, some beeswax, some vanilla, a little bit sort of richer as the oils start to develop on the mid palate. Touch of chocolate, dried fruit, the sherry kind of coming through. There is that sort of citric note as well. The ABV is certainly keeping the fresh feel, and it's not allowing the sherry to become too sweet. Lovely chocolatey aftertaste. Again, that slight herbal nuance, a little bit of herbal chocolate, a little bit of spice, possibly soft spice, ginger maybe, not the sort of peppery kind of spice on the finish. Again, really nicely balanced. Don't think it needs any water. I'm just going to put a little drop, just for the hell of it, just to see what water actually does to it. Okay, it's more floral now. It's brought out that sort of, what I've termed sort of pollen heavy flower note. It's got that sort of, you know, that pollen-y kind of sort of note. I mean, I can't really describe it in any other way apart from, you know, go and sniff a flower that's got loads of pollen. A little bit more honey, less sherry, which is, you can argue, it's not a good thing. So it's more spirit orientated. That's what it passes like. Possibly simpler, less sherry influence, less of that herbal note that I found on the palate when it was neat, certainly on the nose. Biscuitier, possibly, slightly more malty, a little bit more barleyed. I mean, I like that either way. I think personally I prefer it neat. I don't think it really needs water. I think sort of the ABV kind of helps make it feel fresh and just sort of just kind of balance off the sweetness from the sherry. So all in all, another cracking whisky from Holyrood, I think. Or Holyrood, I should say. Holyrood. Okay, so let's move on to the Friar John Core number 3. So ex-Bourbon, Amontillado and Pedro Ximenez. Right, there's a bit of an alcohol prickle, but I can tell you now, that does not smell like 60%. I mean, ooh, danger territory here, you know. it's got a high-toned kind of character, you know, light sort of Amontillado dried fruit. There's a little bit of rose petal. It's got that sort of youthful intensity, coffee, Turkish delight, treacle, pepper. There's a little bit of sweetness coming from the PX, but the ABV is really kind of clamping down on any sweetness. A little bit of wood. It's okay. It's got some complexity. I like the complexity of the different cask types with the spirit. The spirit is just a little young, with that sort of rose petally kind of Mari kind of note still evident. Personally, I think I would have left it a little longer, I think, but it's not a bad nose. Let's sort of pass on. Quite masked, no surprise there. So it kicks off with, again, more of the Amontillados, sort of oxidised dried fruit, a little bit of silkiness from the PX. There's a very savoury character to it. It's got a chewy, malty, kind of thick, intense kind of character. I'm not getting a lot of spirit character. I'm not getting a lot of... I know Lindores has a beautiful estery, fruity character, and I'm not getting any of that, it has to be said. It is pretty much dominated by the sherry, but there is some complexity there within, and there is some spirit character, but it is quite young spirit, it has to be said. It's quality, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. It's my least favoured of the 3 releases in the Friar John Core series so far. I mean, I have them in my collection. I'm kind of stuck with that now as I've started. You know, it's kind of like, where do you start and stop a collection? And I love the black bottle. I love all of that. You know, and I'm a big fan of Lindores. I mean, you know that. This bottling just again is another one that just misses the sort of like the benchmark by half a thou. But you know. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just like I said, you know, when you set your bar really, really high, you know, anything that just falls a little bit short is very noticeable. Anyway, let's see what a little bit of water does. Okay, right, so it has knocked down some of the sherry character. I'm getting some barley now, but I'm still getting the... Oh, I'm not about to say raw. It is a little bit raw. Young, youthful, rose petally spirit. You know, it's just, there's a little bit. It's a nascent kind of esteriness. You can smell that's there, and it's just too young. The spirit has just been bottled too young in this particular bottling, I think. Let's see what that's like. Softer, more PX notes, more treacle, sweeter. Obviously now the ABV has kind of been reduced. A little bit more barley. It's got a lovely length. It's a nice whiskey at the end of the day, but it's just sort of falls short on a few things for me. But you know, overall I really love the distillery, and although this is not a bad whiskey, I don't think it quite lives up to some of the other bottlings. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Lochlea cask strength. Now, colour wise, yeah, it's not that dark. Let's hope there's not too much sherry going on here. No, there is actually. It's really boisterous. It's big. It's kind of herbal oloroso, dried fruit, prune. Not a huge amount of peat smoke. There's a bit there in the background, but it really is kind of struggling to get through all that sherry. Again, no real distillery character. We are talking a lot of wood, which is good in certain circumstances, I will say, if you know what I mean. It's very clean sherry. You know, it's kind of pleasant. There's a bit of a creaminess creeping through now from the American oak. But again, this is not quite a huge sherry monster, but we're in sherry monster territory. Anyway, let's see what the parts are. A little mass, but considering that's close to 60%, it's not too mass. Although my mouth is watering now to say it has to be said. So it kicks off with silky raisinated fruits. Again, lots of sherry. Not so much of the herbal Oloroso, sweeter Oloroso. And this is the thing. You know, I mean, you don't know, you know, it's an ex-Oloroso cask, but you can have dry Oloroso, you have sweet Oloroso, you know, you just don't know what was in it before, unless, of course, you know, you have a relationship with either normally with one of the cooperages in Spain, and you can then specify how your cask is seasoned. I mean, you know, I don't think there's very much buying of casks now directly from sherry bodegas. There probably is a few historic sort of contracts, I guess, but I think sort of like your bulk of the sherry casks now will come from cooperages that have been seasoned. So like I said, you don't really know. It says Oloroso on the label, but you don't know whether it's dry or sweet. But anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there. I mean, again, it's a pleasant whiskey. It's a bit heavy on the sherry. It's kind of, I don't get a lot of peat. I mean, the peat is there, but you know, it really is kind of, you know, well and truly buried by the sherry. I would have basically gone for a little less sherry and a little bit more peated cask personally, but of course then, yeah, I'm not choosing this stuff. But water hasn't made a huge amount of difference on the nose. As we said, it's still pretty much the same as what it was neat, heftily sherried. There's a little bit more bourbony character there underneath that, but again, the peat has just gone completely AWOL. There's no peat there at all now. Let's sort of pass on. Okay, there's some peat smoke now on the palate. I can now get a bit of peat smoke, and there's a little slight herbal kind of almost iodine-y note. The sherry is kind of like sort of dropping off quite considerably. It's certainly better with a little drop of water, in my opinion. And again, Lochlea has that lovely kind of estery character, a bit like Lindores, the modern style of lowland whiskey. And yeah, you shove it all under a mountain of the sherry. It's kind of like, yeah, all right, there are people that love the sherry monsters. I can see the point, but it's not my favourite style, as you well know. It's just, it makes a whiskey a little bit too one-dimensional, you know, just I mean, I'm not, as you know, I'm not averse to the use of sherry casks, but just keep them to a minimum. Okay, so deep breath. We're on to bottling number 2 of the Midge, or the 2025 release of the Midge. So it is 50% bourbon, 48% ruby port, and 2% sherry. So I don't think this is going to be a sherry-dominated spirit, is it? And it isn't, and it's really nice. It doesn't suffer from the overt youthfulness of the previous release. It's got some fresh barleyed character, although it's only 50% American oak aged, and the rest is kind of, you know, other casks. The bourbon is very much in the ascendancy. There's a little bit of earthy peat. There's some dried sort of fruit. There's some red fruit, black fruit, coffee, cherry. I like that. That works really nicely. Again, it's subtle, and this is the whole point. It's kind of spirit focused, oak second, which is how it should be, I think. You know, it's kind of, oak should always really be backing things up, in my personal opinion, and a whiskey should always show the spirit character. I know a lot of people would probably disagree with that, but for me, that is what I want from a whisky. I want a whisky to tell me what the spirit is like first and foremost. There's a little bit of smokiness coming through now, but I like this. I think this is really nicely balanced. It's a well put together whisky, and it's, you know, Ardnamurchan is famous for releasing balanced, great whisky, and you know, I think the last bottling of the Midge was a bit of a blip, and this is really back on form. I should have passed on. That's really nice. That's lovely. Kind of kicks off with the earthy, porty fruit. Then we get a little bit of peat kind of coming through. It's got a sort of a bit of an astringency, earthy kind of peat, not overly peated. Even though that's 75% peated spirit and 25% unpeated, the oak has kind of like knocked a lot of that off, but there's still enough there to give you some interest. There's some barley. It's not as irritating, shall we say, as the last bottling. So the midges have been contained a bit, it has to be said. Lovely. I love that. That's a great whisky. It's really balanced. It's rounded. I like that. That's not overly woody, and the spirit character is not too young. It's shiny through. That's just lovely. Right, okay, so on to the final bottling of the afternoon. This is the Torabhaig Sound of Sleat. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, I love the intensity of that. That's a great whisky. It's green pepper, yeah, green bell pepper, you know, asparagus, herbal peat, sweet barley. I mean, this is not a one-dimensional peat monster. There's a lovely sweetness to the barley underneath it. It's really salty. There's a little bit of almost kind of cedary kind of note kind of coming out. I'm guessing that that's possibly the virgin oak, because obviously it's not been aged in cedar at all. That would be an interesting whisky. I've never seen a whisky that's been matured in a cedar cask. I imagine it's probably the cedar is too intense, too cedary, if you like. I mean, certainly when they use cedar obviously in cigar boxes and stuff like that, and although they use it because it's not supposed to impregnate the cigar, it bloody well does. I mean, cedar is a really strong smelling oak, it has to be said. But anyway, kind of coming back to this, I love the freshness of that. I love the green pepper. I love the intensity. A little bit of white fruit underneath, like I said, barley, balanced, absolutely fantastically balanced. Not too much oak. I mean, I think, like I said, that sort of the virgin oak is giving it that kind of cedary kind of character, but the refill oak is kind of doing what it should, giving it structure, balance, sitting beneath the spirit. So we'll pass on. That's a lovely whisky. Again, kicks off with the green pepper, the asparagus, the sort of, you know, the capsicum, bell pepper kind of character. A little bit more oak on the palate, a little bit more creaminess, which is lovely. It's got that lovely astringent, salty, green peat kind of character. Touch of coffee bean, again green coffee bean, but I think it's that green pepper note that's just sort of like infusing everything with the greenness. But it's got some nice sweet barley. Again, the oak has got a nice creaminess to it. It's really nicely balanced, it has to be said. There's a nice kind of coastal note coming through as well. It's just a gorgeous whisky at the end of the day, and it's kind of like, you know, sky does not begin and end in Talisker, it has to be said. And although Talisker is not a bad whisky, and yeah, no problem with Talisker whatsoever, I just seem to have more of a love-in with Torabhaig. I just, you know, it's because I have, I suppose, a bit of a relationship with them, you know, not quite the sort of relationship that I used to have with Brooklady, but, you know, nobody has a relationship with Talisker at the end of the day. I mean, it's bloody Diageo, for God's sake. Anyway, oh, that's just a good whiskey to finish on. I love that. Okay, so that's some today's episode of the show. Well, personally, I think it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of showcased, in essence, what I love about whiskey and what I don't love about whiskey. I mean, certainly the Drumshanbo Galanta, just as a whiskey, was just fantastic. Loved it. My kind of whiskey. Didn't love the price, and I don't understand why it is so expensive. It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. When the other bottlings in their range, like I said, the pot still bottling is 50% of the retail price of this, so it makes absolutely no sense. And I think, you know, I know whiskey can be expensive at the best of times, but certainly, you know, I mean, I was tasting some whiskey earlier this week from another distillery, which may well end up in an episode of the show, and it was kind of like, why is it so expensive? It's only 3 or 4 years old. But anyway, I digress. Pitch, loved the pitch. I thought the pitch was absolutely fantastic. Lovely balance between the spirit character and the oak. The Friar John Core, I mean, a good bottling. I'm not going to say that it isn't a good bottling, but it just didn't quite hit the point of some of the previous releases from Lindores. And same, I guess, to say with the Lochlea. Again, you know, intriguing bottling, just a bit too heavy on the sherry. Not quite a sherry monster, but we were certainly in the sherry monster kind of territory. The Midge, loved this bottling. The Midge, again, all about the balance, you know, spirit character, not overwhelmed by the oak, enough kind of influence from the oak to make it interesting and give complexity. Really, really nice. And the sound of Sleat, the Torabhaig, again, lovely whiskey, and it just basically goes to show that the distillery is producing some really quality spirit. Love that kind of fresh green peppery kind of character, and real intensity to it, but it's not, and although it's pretty heavily peated, 70 odd parts per million is not, you know, a shrinking violet, it's not sort of like a one-dimensional peat monster. There's some sweetness from the barley coming through, there's a little bit from the oak, and like I said, it had that kind of almost cedary kind of character, which is quite intriguing. So I would, like I said, definitely recommend picking up a bottle of that from wherever you purchase your whiskey from. So that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I think it's been really intriguing. I've loved this week's episode of the show. I'm going to go and have a lay down in a minute, as to be said. But until then, next week is going to be the last episode for a week or so, because I'm going to be doing some decorating. So I've got a bloody good episode lined up, I can tell you that. But anyway, until then, all that's left to say is good dramming and good afternoon.